there are things in this report that absolutely are bunk. They're silly. I think the government is putting their foot in their mouth in a couple of these areas. But what I was also surprised, but not pleasantly surprised about, was what they ignored. And it was the fact that, and this goes back to what I've said for years, when you spotlight the stories and you spotlight the stuff that lacks evidence, when you put that in front of somebody who finally is taking the opportunity to look at it, and you kind of essentially put all that out front, and they look at it and there's absolutely nothing to support it, what happens? You get a report like what we just went over. Stuff that dismisses the grandiose claims, which in some cases is likely very warranted. But what about the stuff that they do have? The evidence that the government has come clean about, although sometimes you have to fight for it through FOIA and appeals and lawsuits and litigation. But when that evidence comes out, what happens to that? And in this report, they didn't deal with it. One example would be the fact that it was about a decade where the U.S. Air Force, that one military branch that is surprisingly mum and has been throughout this whole conversation, playing very little role in the public part of this conversation when it comes to UAP, had on the books through the late 90s, early 2000s, all the way to the late 2000s, a regulation to report and document unidentified flying objects that their military pilots were encountering. I have documented proof that when I went to the one receiving end, which was NORAD, for these service reports, they said, well, we're not subject to FOIA, but they did look under a NORAD regulation where they try and mimic and honor the spirit of the FOIA, that they found absolutely nothing. No service reports on UFOs. And the reason why NORAD was not subject to FOIA was because they're under Canadian control as well. So U.S. law didn't apply. Well, to quickly summarize the end of this story, the Canadian government sent me hundreds of service reports that went through NORAD on unidentified flying objects. My whole point? The U.S. Air Force and their history of post-Project Blue Book of investigating UFOs was not only covered up, but on top of that proven by the Canadian government. AARO doesn't deal with those types of things at all. Why are military branches and government agencies lying about their UFO and UAP information, and why have they lied for decades if there's absolutely nothing to any of these claims? That doesn't make sense. They also don't talk about the intelligence files, because when you dig, even post-Project Blue Book into the 70s and beyond, they talk about UAP material being carried, hand-carried, to somebody's office within the CIA, that there was some type of UFO something that was connected to a case that piqued the interest of the CIA internally. This document actually goes on to talk about an informal effort to essentially keep tabs on the UAP conversation. This was years after the U.S. government completed their investigation, and they maintained interest. The CIA was still actively involved. The National Security Agency has hundreds of communications dealing with UFOs that blow well past the Project Blue Book era and go through the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s, most of which are classified top secret to this day. When I tried to get these further declassified and get these redactions lifted, there are hundreds of these pages. The NSA lost each and every one. At least so they claim. So these redactions will stick forever. Doesn't matter what congressional legislation is passed. It doesn't matter what UAP Disclosure Act is created. It doesn't matter. According to the National Security Agency, it's all gone anyway. The originals were destroyed, and these redacted with black and white out are the only things that remain. What is so secretive about the intelligence on UFOs that is being collected around the world? Sources and methods? Absolutely. Redact that. Is that all of this? Likely not. So what is it that they're hiding? But the NSA isn't alone. You look at the Defense Intelligence Agency, this is only two of numerous pages that are found within the DIA's files of heavily classified UAP and UFO related material. I received these in the late 90s, and there are hundreds of them. Years ago, Did the exact same thing with the DIA that I did to the NSA, requested what are called mandatory declassification reviews to try and get all of these redactions lifted. By the way, they didn't even use black ink. They used a razor blade to cut out these pages and photocopied pages with holes in them because they didn't want to waste the ink. When I finished the cases and the MDRs got to the end, you know what the DIA said? They lost each and every one of their intelligence papers on UFOs. So these documents here that are keeping tabs on UFO-related information, and even here, a UFO research organization in China, they're all gone. They're all lost to history. No congressional legislation, no UAP Disclosure Act are going to bring these back from the shredders, at least or so they claim. Will they make the government actually come clean and say, yeah, we were lying for decades and we actually do have all of these? Well, we can only hope, but probably not. The report also didn't talk about the excessive secrecy that remains to this day. And if you ask me, it's a lot worse today than it was decades ago. In fact, it's a lot worse than it was just 10 years ago. This is the Security Classification Guide. Likely has been revised by now. I've got multiple cases for more recent versions. But regardless, I expect something very similar to this. Blacked out, top secret, top to bottom. They do not want you to know why they are keeping UAP and UFO information secret. This guide actually defines the secrecy. This is what is used by our U.S. government on UAP information to say if UAP information is classified. And today, everything is. Where does it stem from? This guide. But the UAP report doesn't talk about any of that excessive secrecy. In my opinion, not only is this secrecy excessive, on top of that, they are employing tactics, including a law enforcement exemption, to take AARO's files and keep them secret. So if they're not classified, or if I, by some stroke of luck, can fight what's called a B1 exemption, classified because it's secret or top secret, if I'm lucky enough to try and fight that, there's already a second layer that they've put on that stems from exemption B7, or a law enforcement investigation. I have appealed those on numerous occasions. I've lost each and every one. I always like to highlight the successes when it comes to appeals, but sometimes you have to highlight the failures. Why doesn't the report, the one that we just got this year, talk about this excessive secrecy? It's not all sources and methods. It's not all classified platform sensor technology. And how do we know that? Easy. When a Russian jet decides to spray gas over one of our MQ-9 Reaper drones, we have a video circulating our media like that. They review it, they declassify it, we see it in full, it's crystal clear, it's beautiful footage, and you see the Russian jet go and spray fuel. What's my point? There is something about UAP information that they don't want you to see. They hide behind the sources and methods explanation and exemption. They hide behind the, well, we can't tell you how our classified platforms work. They hide behind that. But what they don't want you to realize is putting the pieces together of this puzzle, that they'll show you that Russian jet spraying a highly classified platform like the MQ-9, but they won't show you anything about UAP. Why not? What's the difference? There is no difference, or at least there shouldn't be, if we are to believe what they're trying to sell in this report. They also don't talk about our spy satellites, how the fact that the National Reconnaissance Office has a highly classified platform called Sentient, which sees tic-tac shaped objects, very much like the 2004 incident, but all the way into the last couple of years. What are they seeing? What software or what ability within the Sentient system allows them to see and detect these tic-tac shaped objects? This was a highly classified top secret briefing on one of those observations. The report doesn't mention anything like this, at least not the public one. They just want to pass off that it's not extraterrestrial and it's not anything they can't explain if they have the proper data. They clearly have the proper data. The data is there seeing these tic-tac shaped objects. And yet they don't deal with that in the report. Maybe volume 2. They also don't deal with the highly classified nature of this report and topic. So the report is unclassified. They give it to the public, but they don't deal with the real secrecy behind UAP. This is a declassified, also top secret memo on unidentified aerial phenomenon. Now they call it unidentified anomalous phenomena. You can see here it's only declassified because they redacted almost every single word. That's the secrecy that this is on. That's the level that all of this is on. Why? If all of this is easily dismissed and really does stem back to a core group of people that are kind of creating these cockamamie conspiracy theories, fine, I can understand that in parts of the conversation. But the report conveniently left out the real stuff, the real information, the real question marks that people like me have. Sure, we can argue all day long about gimbal, FLIR, glare, speed of the go fast, whether or not Luis Elizondo really headed ATIP, whether or not David Grush has firsthand knowledge or not, whatever. We can argue until our face turns blue. The bottom line with those arguments is we don't know the answer at the end of the day. But the report doesn't want you to look at this and ask about this. They just want to deal with that. Greatest trick of a magician. Look over here so you don't see what's going on over here. And that is exactly what this report has done. That is exactly what they want you to believe. There's nothing here. There's nothing to it. Stop asking questions and stop looking for answers. We've explained it. We did it through the 1960s, the Project Blue Book era. We solved it. No, they didn't. Evidence showed otherwise. They conveniently left out the information that you don't hear as much about. It's not as sexy as somebody going up to Congress under oath saying, well, I heard stories about non-human biologics. That's sexy. That's headlines, right? That's what you get in the spotlight. But is that really what we need? Until we see the proof of that non-human biologic, let's look and ask the important questions on stuff we can prove and fall back on with actual evidence. That doesn't mean it just has to stay with FOIA. FOIA is not everything. A lot of my haters always say, John thinks FOIA is everything. No, it's not. It's just what I love more than somebody's story. And I stand by that, but it's not everything. And no one can ever cite where I've said it. But it's a great starting point. And I think that when the government agencies like the CIA, the DIA, the NSA, the Pentagon itself, all has pieces of the puzzle that when put together, negate this report, it's worth asking about. And it's worth paying attention to.